them, of course, being Digicel, speaking about the clarity of Lime's reception, which was probably not that true at the time, but has come to fruition. Fling them way and come meet we. Drama, Lime Phone and Credit. It plays out a scene here, including Portmore again, because Portmore is where the Gaza and cartel were identified with, are still identified with. From your past told every day, every last soul of a Lime phone. That's how the boss roll. I will start on BlackBerry smartphone with AC the yard so the glass is cold. Now, part of Portmore's legacy is that it is famed for a particular road where there are many clubs. And it talks about the strip girls that dance upon the glass pole. For money, the jewelry no false gold when them see the Gaza roll. So, concluding, with the 3 dub plates having elements of 2 or more of the 4 elements Chamberlain identifies in dub plates, I deem them genuine dub plates and not simulacra of sound system culture. This is held by Lime signing Flavor Unit Sound System among its Lime with the Sound personnel, Lime with the Stars personnel. So a genuine sound system played genuine dub plates for a telecommunications company, a very rare phenomenon in the use of Jamaican popular music for marketing. This marketing structure allowed the Lime dub plates to be seamlessly interwoven into the music. Flavor Unit played at various events staged by the company, often mixing the commercially released singles with the Lime dub plates. In doing this, the marketing became an unobtrusive part of the event's soundtrack, satisfying a requirement of entertainment marketing. Entertainment marketing, where the product appears to be a part of the entertainment, subsumes product placement, where there's obvious product promotion. However, as effective as the dubs were sonically, it is impossible to isolate and determine their effect on Lime's customer base and profitability from the rest of Lime with the Stars campaign. And that campaign was, as large as it was, ultimately a failure at reinvigorating the company. Thank you.
Thank you, Mel. No, as chair, I also present on this panel as well. What's interesting is the Nicole Plummer and Erin McLeod's paper and also Mel's paper talk about a lot of wealth in the local being Jamaica. So my paper, I decided to go at the end because it's the start of a project of trying to track the transnational effects of the global music cultures that are created here in Kingston. So I'm waiting to be queued up now. Thank you. All right, so thank you, everyone. So this is part of a wider transnational cultural flow research project, and so these are some of the preliminary presentation, mostly from the most obvious themes that have come out of the interviews so far. This paper is based on interviews with Jamaican dancehall artists and dancers who interact with the Australian dancehall scene, and then, of course, those within the Australian scene, the dancers and the artists, and trying to see, what advantage or disadvantage they felt either group had. My background as a former head of creative industries here in Jamaica, there's a lot of conversation about the fact that we've created these various musical cultures and forms inspired others, but who actually really benefits. And so this is the start of trying to track that in a number of different spaces. Having done my PhD in Australia and being involved in that scene, it was just the most logical starting point for my contribution. And, you know, within the wider music industry, there's a lot of research that focuses on two particular aspects in terms of advantage within the musical industry space. One, the issue of location, the traditional locus of the at least recorded music industry, London, New York, Los Angeles, and the degree of disadvantage that is accrued to those who aren't based there. Two, there's also the issue of authenticity and the rise in world music, you know. So there have been a number of presentations. I believe it was Dr. Charles talking about and I believe Nicole as well, about the cultural capital, so being Jamaican and that as cultural capital, not within the international space. And how much does that actually blunt the disadvantage of the location of Kingston? And then I wanted to have them interact, because there has been a lot of work and continuing work from the likes of, say, Roberta Communion on marginality within the global north space, you know, rural England, etc., etc. So, and there's an expectation that that kind of marginality is similar to a global south marginality. So, for example, when I was head of creative industries, you know, the policy advice that was given to me by international development agencies were based on what had worked or not worked in rural Europe. I argue that we're not rural Europe. How do I? So let me skip that. So back, you know, forcefully to the earnings gap. The earnings gap to which I refer is that the estimates are 2 to 4 billion earned by the international reggae industry, and 130 million, these are US dollars, earned by the Jamaican music industry. I think the gap is apparent. And these are old figures. This is from 2007, I believe. And I'm awaiting an update that should be soon in various studies that are being conducted by the government of Jamaica. But if that was the situation, then I can imagine what it is now. The earnings gap and its link to transnational circulation is one that is well known within the music industry itself. I use lyrics from A Champion Boy by Alkaline in 2016, where he's, you know, declaring his prominence within the industry, and one of the insults is, them not have a hot song, them can't left the Caribbean, sometimes I wonder how them survive. Clearly linking the ability to move and perform abroad with economic earnings and potential. Then you have Chronics with Likes, which an extremely popular song, 2017. Go on like say them their studio voice, how me never bought them up on no flight, me never see them a live no tour life. Yo, Mr. Man, how you have so much likes, and Amalia is still a lead on iTunes. So, you know, one, again, making it very clear, what are you actually doing in this industry? If you're not traveling, if you're not touring, are you relevant in this industry? And also highlighting the fact that it's still Mali on iTunes. I'm not sure if that's necessarily true now. I think Mali might be number 2, but, you know, just the fact that it's still that 1970s era of reggae that resonates within the international marketplace, and just how that affects earnings and people, the artists themselves and those within the industry calibrate their earning potential according to that. Right. In my own work, I decided to, coming from a kind of network analysis point of view, I looked at the Billboard charts. When you want to see who is hot or who is at the top of a genre, you look at the charts. There's a whole literature about the superstar economy. Those who are at the top get disproportionately benefit. So if you have the #1 song, then you get all the endorsements, etc., etc. It's not calibrated down the line, and so the charts provide a way for us to see, well, who are the people on these charts, and where are the artists who are benefiting coming from. So I looked at the Billboard Reggae year-end charts, the top 10. From 2011 to 2018. I started in 2011 because this came out of a comparative with K-pop, and that was when K-pop entered the Billboard charts. But now I intend to go further back because there's a much longer history for reggae. Granted, I am talking about dancehall, but the reggae charts calibrates everything: reggae, dancehall, etc. And you find that on average 4.4, so 4 Jamaican artists are included in the top 10, while American artists 5 each year. So basically they divide this top 10. In addition, it's interesting that three artists per year come from California. So California alone accounts for almost a third of the reggae charts. And then the Marleys account for 2.3. So you see certain trends in these two populations. And you realize, so the disproportionate benefit to anyone named Marley, and the disproportionate benefit to California, which aligns with other studies about global music cities and the place of California in that realm. Also, since 2011, only 3 Jamaican artists have ever topped the charts. So again, aligned with the whole disproportionate benefit that is accrued to those at the top. So the way, was it Neil who talked about Drake? You hit the charts once, the likelihood of hitting it again is much greater, etc., etc. So only 3 Jamaicans have topped it: Damian Marley, Bob Marley, and Shaggy, along with Sting, in 2018. Congrats on the Grammy. So, and so that's laying up just what the state of play is in reggae and dancehall. So we go, why Australia? It's the 8th largest music market in the world. That sounds nice, but it means music market. 1, we're talking about recorded music. 2, we're only talking about 2% of that market as the 8th largest. So in those terms, they're likewise marginal. And just seeing the clumping together of policies for an Australia and a Jamaica. In a book I published recently with a colleague of mine, The Global Cultural Economy, we talked about 5 different approaches that the governments usually have towards the creative industries, and one of them was the celebratory aspect. We have culture, it is great, we can make money, but without thinking what are the nuances in terms of how that transnational flow occurs. And so this is a starting point as to try and get these nuances, or trying to quantify and identify these nuances. I have here, pictures from two major players within the Australian dancehall scene. You have the Inner West Sound that comes out of Sydney, huge sound system. And then you have Cat Pretty from the Burn City, Queens. So arguably one of the top dancehall dancers, and also host of the National Dancehall Queen and King competition for Australia. And some of those I interviewed. The Australian dancehall scene happened later than most places because, one, you have such a tiny diaspora, whether Caribbean or in general just black. And then it also wasn't a node of what I like to call the reggae diaspora. So New Zealand, just across the way, huge reggae diaspora place. You know, Maoris and other and bought into reggae, the music of anti-oppression, etc. The situation for the indigenous peoples of Australia is politically starkly different, and so it just didn't become that kind of reggae place. So the few reggae heads in Australia did play dancehall, but it didn't quite move beyond that tiny scene. Dancehall got its hit entered into Australia as an extension of R&B and hip-hop. So it entered in almost without its own name beyond that tiny circle. And that has implications for the earnings that follow. Right. So I have, two main things: dancehall as livelihood and dancehall as superstardom, and just comparing these two spaces. So you have Australia, where actually in Australia it's easier to make a living from dancehall. It's not easy, it's just easier compared to Jamaica. And it's they have a lack of a dedicated community because a lot of people don't know dancehall is dancehall. They think it's R&B, they think it's EDM, so the few that do know it's dancehall is too small a community to support an economic ecosystem around it. Also, dancehall is a hobby. It's something that people who've gotten into the dances start doing as a hobby. It's not a profession, so they go to the classes, which doesn't really happen here, go to the classes and are devotees. The way, people here might go to salsa classes, but it's not your job. It's what you do after you do your job. And so those who have the linchpins of the dancehall community of Australia have had to survive with what I call inclusive businesses. So businesses that include dancehall but have had to include other things throughout the African diaspora, Afrobeat, etc. So you have a studio that teaches dancehall classes, but also Afrobeat classes, also Zumba, also salsa, etc. You keep parties, again, just Africa, all the musical expressions of the African diaspora, or you become a selector, which, again, tough, but possible. And then access to arts funding. So you have the Australia Council for the Arts, you have Multicultural Arts, Victoria, or whichever state you're in. And so it's difficult, but it's possible. And you've seen the range. Okay. Jamaica, dancehall is a job, right? Side businesses are difficult because who are you going to teach dancehall dancing to? So most of the studios survive from foreign clientele. You do tours, etc. And you only have one arts funding body, which also funds health, sports, education, etc. So making a livelihood in Jamaica, very difficult. But dancehall stardom, it's the other way, right? There are no dancehall stars or superstars in Australia. There are noted dancehall people, but no one in the interview so far have identified anyone as a star, even by their own evaluation. And also, Australia is very keen on authenticity. You need to, have a link to Jamaica, etc. And ironically, that very authenticity actually makes it even more difficult to be a star, because then, you don't appropriate. So I hear I'm out of time, so I'm playing one clip. One of the biggest funding tranches into dancehall ever by the state government was one where they had a dancehall team do a music festival in Tasmania literally 3 weeks ago. And as part of that fund, they had to carry Jamaican dancers to Australia. So this was, so it was the Jamaican dancers and the Australian dancers performing together at this festival. So you see the, oh, it's not. Sorry, it's very low. What do I do? Yeah, I don't know. All right. So while in Jamaica, dancehall stars, superstars, of course, lots. We're authentic. We're, you know, we just can't get to where people make money. So even in even when network analysis are done of the Australian music industry, the top cities in terms of power, connectivity, etc., in the Australian in the Australian music industry are London, New York, and Los Angeles. So even for the Australian music industry themselves, their own cities are marginal. So you add where we do there is superstardom and access to superstardom in Jamaica because they're authentic. They not carry they're assumed, and they spend time learning and crafting and innovating in a way that doesn't happen in Australia because it's not a job there. But on the other hand, that is if they survive the lack of livelihood, if they survive those first two stages. The middle picture is a picture of Bad Girl, who I do like, but it also speaks to the marginality that Australians also have in that space. You know, the Australian dancehall artists are seen as lacking authenticity. But is it really just that, or is it a function of their marginality in location? Because Bad Girl, I mean, she's from Spain, from Barcelona in particular, so she's a Catalan star, and had not actually been to Jamaica, didn't really know much about dancehall, but it didn't impact on her, on people seeing her as authentic. And so those are some of the different strands and nuances of marginality that I am exploring, and I will say more, but as chair, I'm already over time, which is bad. So we will open up the floor, and thank you for listening. I think given the time, I will, you know, do what my previous chair, Lisa, did and say 3 questions. Dr. Sanlanaya, 3? All right, 3 questions.
Thanks for that great presentation, you all. My question is about wealth, so I guess it's mainly for Nicole Plummer. Well, I wondered in terms of this notion of wealth that you're describing, is it the kind of like conspicuous consumption that's like for the community's sake, like the richer or more substantial the king, the more he's willing or expected to share the wealth, like to anyone who comes on the scene, kind of a situation? Or is the wealth that you're describing kind of like a more self-centered or just me and my friends kind of thing, so that in the situation of an actual gathering or something, are people willing to share those blinged out bottles of Moet or whatever it is to people who they might not know? Or what is the nature of the wealth and the consumption that you're talking?
One of the things that we found is that the use of wealth itself is very subjective. So, for example, you will have the deportee that Caroline Cooper had cited, and in that song, he's castigated because he's literally squandered his wealth. So on one hand, he didn't invest in people, he didn't invest in his community, and he didn't put aside anything for a rainy day. There's this idea that if you have money, you spend it on relatives and family. Some will go further and say, let's spend it on building my community. I didn't get to go into there was a section that we had discussed with Movado's song, where he actually invests his money and he pays his taxes. He literally boasts that I pay my tax, I have money. So if you want to look at it, one of the interpretations both Erin and I gave to that, and that came out of that song, is taxes help to pay hospital. For example, in Jamaica, we have no user fees. So if you, even if it's indirectly, the funds that he's making is building the nation. Now, he also talks about having stocks, etc. So he's building himself as well. If I were to go back into the colonial past, and I don't want to go too far back, the planters themselves weren't really noted for building a community. In fact, in my thesis, I looked at charity, and that the planters themselves, only a few of them, when they left money behind, they might have left avenues for schools to be formed, or for, say, poor whites to be sustained. And some of those schools still exist today, and they might have what you call dependence out of the will. But there was no general sense that I must build this nation, build this community. And whereas you find coming out of the individuals who are climbing the social ladder, there may be a community spirit. They are encouraged, as you can see in that song, to help at least your family and the people who have helped you to climb. But there's no strong obligation to help the entire Jamaica, if you understand what I mean. Oh, sorry, Erin had a point. She said, I would suggest that there is a suggestion that wealth allows you to get into a conversation about what to do with capital. You are simply not a part of the conversation without it.
Any other questions? For Mel, Nicole, myself? No? Oh, introduce yourself, please.
Mike Wire from Reggae Village Trinity. In a conversation a couple of days ago with a prominent morning radio hostess on a Jamaican television station, she was critical of the fact that the government had failed over decades to put any money into reggae music. What are your feelings about that failure? Do you agree that that's a justifiable comment? When the Minister for Culture and Equalities and things like that says that young artists should emulate the model of the great Dennis Brown, she doesn't actually back it up with any finance.
That's a long-standing conversation. Actually, so my own work was based on, started off with a comparative of cultural policy. I would agree with that statement. I think it comes, but the obstacles to it are financial and they're cultural as well. In my thesis, I talked a lot about, I borrowed a concept called dignity, where it talks about that the reason the Industrial Revolution started in England wasn't just because they were the most inventive, but also because they had the most, the British entrepreneurs had the most support from the wider society. I thought a similar parallel could be brought here in the sense that we have great innovators, but because, as I think a lot of the imagery, etc., is shown, Jamaican music is the sound of the marginalized and the oppressed. And policy doesn't come from the marginalized and the oppressed. And so there are gaps, there are issues, and etc. But I wouldn't necessarily disagree. But the answers aren't just money answers.
Okay. Professor Cook, correct? This question, okay. Well, my question is for you. You spoke about the use of these dub plates to promote the phone companies, etc. And apart from whatever they effect they had on the market share thing, what did sound system people think about that way of using the music? Was there, because you didn't seem to talk about that like happening again or that kind of a thing. So what about that?
Okay, so I know that Flavor Unit, which was hired by Lime essentially, they were happy to play the songs because they were paid to do so. The songs were not played outside of events, as far as I know. I did not see any events, witness any events, experience any events where the songs were played outside of the context of events staged strictly by and organized by the telecommunications company. So they were really a part of an experiential marketing and branding suite of tools. I would not expect Flavor Unit to play those songs at an event for an independent organizer or in a sound clash, certainly. I do not know how many other sound system persons were exposed to those dub plates, and in my work I did not actually expose those songs to other sound system persons and get an idea of their authenticity or their level of acceptance.
Well, thank you all for being with us. I know if you have any other questions, we're floating around, and enjoy the rest of the day. It's lunchtime officially, right? Where is lunch? All right.
On the campus for lunch. There are different sites on the campus for lunch. There is juicy patties, and we can have our volunteers direct people. There are also commercial franchises such as, KFC, I think Burger King. So if you have, and there are also vegetarian options in the university bookshop. So there are volunteers who will assist you. We are going to say, let's try to get back here in half an hour so that we can begin again at 2:30. That's our aim. And if we could do that, we would make up on some of the time today. We've sent out an email, just a few housekeeping announcements. We've sent out an email inviting people who would want to go on the tour on Sunday to sign up. We will repeat the Alpha Tour along with the addition of the museums, the Bob Marley Museum and the Peter Tosh Museum on Sunday morning. So check your emails for that. We've also sent out an email with the stream for the conference that you can share. And also remember, if you're tweeting or using social media at all, the hashtag for the conference is Global Reggae 2019. So thank you very much. Please, let's try to get back here at 2:30. Thank you very much. Question?
Can we leave our things in the room while we have lunch?